What if the deepest pain in your life was never random? What if before you were born, before your mother ever held you, before your name, before your face, before this entire human story began, your soul already knew certain things would happen? The ancient Vedas contain a terrifying and beautiful idea. They say the soul does not enter this world blindly. It arrives carrying unfinished energy, silent agreements, hidden lessons, and a destiny far older than the human mind can remember. Maybe that is why some suffering feels strangely familiar, why some people enter your life and instantly awaken something ancient inside you, why certain losses feel deeper than this lifetime alone, and why, no matter how normal your life may appear on the outside, a part of you has always felt that you came here for something greater than survival. Tonight, we are going to uncover one of the most mysterious teachings hidden inside the Vedas, the idea that before your first breath, your soul signed a silent contract, not for punishment, not for endless suffering, but for awakening. And by the end of this journey, you may finally understand why every heartbreak, every ending, every fear, and every painful chapter changed you so deeply. Because maybe your soul has been trying to remember something this entire time, so let the world become quiet for a little while. Take a slow breath and listen carefully, because somewhere beneath your thoughts, these words may feel less like information and more like a memory returning home. The soul was ancient long before your body existed, long before your first breath entered this world, before your eyes slowly opened to light for the very first time, before anyone whispered your name into the air, before your family held your tiny body in their arms and called you a new life, something far older than this human form already existed silently within creation itself. According to the Vedas, the deepest part of you did not begin at birth. Your body began here, your personality began here, your memories began here, but your soul did not. The ancient sages believed that consciousness is eternal. It does not suddenly appear out of nothing and disappear into nothing. Instead, it moves through existence like an endless river flowing through many forms, many experiences, and many lifetimes. The body changes, but the awareness living inside the body remains ancient, untouched, and continuous. This idea feels difficult for many people because modern life teaches human beings to identify themselves only through visible things. People spend their entire lives saying, "This is who I am," while pointing toward temporary identities. They introduce themselves through their age, their work, their achievements, their failures, their relationships, their religion, their fears, or their emotional wounds. Yet the Vedas whisper something much deeper beneath all of this noise. They say these identities are not your true self. They are only temporary roles consciousness wears for a little while, like clothing worn during a short journey. Imagine an actor stepping onto a stage. For a few hours, he becomes the character completely. He laughs like the character, cries like the character, suffers like the character, and speaks like the character. But deep down, he knows he is not truly that role. When the play ends, the costume is removed, the role disappears, the actor remains. The Vedas say human life is similar. The soul enters a body, takes on an identity, and becomes deeply involved in the experience. But beneath the role, beneath the personality, beneath every fear and every desire, the true awareness remains untouched. The ancient rishis described the soul as something beyond destruction. Fire cannot burn it, water cannot drown it, time cannot weaken it, even death cannot end it. The body grows older every day, thoughts constantly change, emotions rise and fall without warning. Entire versions of yourself disappear across the years. The child you once were no longer exists. The teenager you once were vanished quietly. The person you were 5 years ago has already faded away. Yet something inside you has remained strangely present through all of it. There has always been a silent observer watching your life unfold. It watched your happiest moments. It watched your heartbreak. It watched your fears. It watched your loneliness. It watched every version of you come and go. And even now, while you listen to these words, that same awareness is still present quietly beneath your thoughts. Most people never notice this because the world keeps their attention trapped on the surface of life. The mind becomes busy with survival, comparison, pressure, anxiety, distraction, and endless emotional noise. Human beings become so attached to temporary experiences that they completely forget there is something eternal beneath all of it. This forgetting creates suffering because once you believe you are only the body, only the personality, only the temporary story, fear begins controlling everything. You become afraid of aging because you think the body is your entire existence. You become afraid of rejection because your identity depends on the opinions of others. You become afraid of endings because you think losing something temporary means losing yourself. But the Vedas gently try to remove this illusion. They remind you that beneath every changing experience exists something ancient and unshaken, something that existed before your first breath and will remain after your final one. And perhaps this explains why certain moments in life feel so mysterious. Sometimes you walk into a place you have never visited before, yet something inside you suddenly feels emotional and familiar. Sometimes you meet a stranger and instantly feel connected to them for reasons you cannot explain logically. Sometimes you look at the stars late at night and experience a strange sadness mixed with wonder, almost as if a forgotten memory is trying to return. These moments do not come from the ordinary mind alone. They come from something deeper. The soul remembers things the human personality cannot fully explain. The Vedas suggest that before entering physical life, consciousness exists in a state far beyond fear and confusion. In that state, the soul sees life differently from the way humans see it now. It understands that existence moves in cycles. Birth and death are not endings but transitions. Gain and loss are temporary movements. Pain and joy both become teachers shaping awareness. The soul does not fear change the way the ego fears change because the soul knows nothing in the material world was meant to stay forever. Human beings suffer deeply because they try to hold on to temporary things as if they were permanent. They cling to identities, relationships, emotions, possessions, and expectations. Yet life continues moving, changing, dissolving, and transforming everything constantly, and this creates a painful inner conflict. The soul understands movement. The ego wants permanence. The soul understands surrender. The ego wants control. The soul understands growth. The ego wants comfort. This is why spiritual awakening often begins with discomfort. At some point in life, the human being begins realizing that no temporary achievement can completely satisfy the deeper longing inside them. Even after success, something still feels incomplete. Even after love, something still searches quietly beneath the surface. Even after reaching goals, a strange emptiness sometimes remains. That emptiness is not weakness, it is remembrance. It is the soul quietly reminding you that you were never meant to find your entire identity in temporary things. And no matter how deeply you forget this truth, the soul never fully disappears beneath the illusion of human life. It continues whispering through intuition, dreams, strange emotional recognition, deep longing, and the mysterious feeling that your existence contains meaning far beyond what your eyes can currently see. Sometimes the soul whispers during silence. Sometimes during heartbreak, sometimes during loneliness, sometimes during moments when life suddenly slows down and the noise of the world becomes quiet enough for you to hear yourself again. Perhaps this is why some people suddenly begin searching for deeper truth after suffering. Pain breaks the hypnosis of ordinary life. It forces awareness inward. It makes human beings question who they truly are beneath the roles they spent years performing. And maybe, somewhere deep inside you even now, there is already a silent part, remembering something ancient. A part of you that feels these words not as completely new information, but as something strangely familiar, as if your soul has heard this truth before, as if somewhere beyond memory, beyond language, beyond the limits of the human mind, you already know that you are far more than this temporary body, And perhaps the deepest peace begins the moment you stop seeing yourself as a fragile human being accidentally thrown into existence and start realizing you are ancient awareness temporarily walking through a human experience. Why your soul accepted certain pain before entering this life. One of the deepest and most uncomfortable truths hidden within the Vedas is the idea that your soul may have accepted certain experiences before entering this human life. Not every small detail, not every conversation, not every mistake, but certain lessons, certain emotional journeys, certain awakenings that consciousness itself agreed to walk through long before your birth. At first, the human mind resists this idea completely because the human mind believes pain should never exist. The mind wants safety, comfort, certainty, approval, and control. It spends its entire life trying to avoid discomfort. Yet the soul seeks something much deeper than comfort. The soul seeks awakening. It seeks expansion. It seeks truth powerful enough to break illusion. And according to the ancient sages, some truths can only be understood through direct human experience. This does not mean your soul wanted suffering in a cruel way. The Vedas never describe consciousness as something that enjoys pain. Instead, they suggest that the soul understands something the ego does not understand yet. It understands that certain experiences awaken parts of consciousness that comfort alone never could. Look carefully at human life. Most people are not transformed by easy moments. They are transformed by heartbreak, by loneliness, by grief, by rejection, by uncertainty, by silence, by endings they never expected. Very few people begin deeply questioning life while everything feels comfortable and predictable. Most awaken only after something inside their old identity begins collapsing. Pain forces human beings inward. It interrupts the hypnosis of ordinary life. It breaks the illusion that external things can permanently protect the soul from suffering. And perhaps this is why some struggles repeat so mysteriously across life. The same emotional wound appears wearing different faces. The same fear keeps returning through different situations. The same loneliness follows you through different chapters. The same abandonment, the same betrayal, the same need for validation, the same feeling of not being enough. The Vedas explain this through karma, but karma is often misunderstood. Karma is not simply punishment for bad actions. It is movement. It is unfinished energy continuing until awareness fully understands itself. Every thought, every attachment, every emotional pattern creates movement within consciousness. And until awareness becomes complete, life continues presenting lessons through different experiences. Imagine trying to learn something important while refusing to look directly at it. Life will keep bringing you back to the same doorway until you finally see clearly what your soul came here to understand. This is why some people spend years trapped inside the same emotional cycles without realizing it. The people around them change, but the inner pattern remains the same. They continue chasing people who cannot love them properly. They continue abandoning themselves to gain acceptance. They continue searching outside themselves for peace they have never learned to create within. And eventually the soul whispers quietly, "Please see this clearly now." Not because the soul wants you to suffer forever, but because awareness is trying to free itself from unconscious patterns. The Vedas teach that before birth, the soul exists in a state beyond ordinary fear. In that state, consciousness sees human life from a much wider perspective. What feels terrifying to the ego may appear meaningful to the soul. What humans call painful endings, the soul may recognize as necessary transformation. Imagine standing above an entire lifetime and seeing every moment at once. You would see how one heartbreak redirected a person toward their true path, how one rejection protected them from greater suffering later, how one season of loneliness forced them to finally discover themselves, how one painful loss awakened compassion inside them, how one difficult experience broke their attachment to illusion. The soul sees farther than the human mind. This is why some events feel strangely destined, even while they hurt deeply. Somewhere beneath the suffering, Something ancient inside you sometimes senses there is meaning hidden within the experience, not because pain itself is beautiful, but because transformation often hides inside pain. And perhaps the hardest part of being human is that the mind usually understands this only after the storm has passed. There are moments in life where suffering feels unbearable while it is happening. You beg for the chapter to end. You ask why life is being so cruel. You feel abandoned by existence itself. Yet years later, you quietly realize that the experience changed you in ways comfort never could have. Many people become softer after suffering, wiser after heartbreak, more conscious after loss, more compassionate after pain, more awake after everything they depended on disappeared. Because pain strips away illusion, it exposes attachments, it reveals where identity became dependent on temporary things. And this is why the Vedas saw suffering differently from the way most people see it now. They did not glorify pain, but they recognized its power to awaken consciousness. Without difficulty, many humans would remain asleep inside ego forever. Without endings, many would never release attachment. Without uncertainty, many would never search for deeper truth. Without emotional darkness, many would never discover the light hidden within awareness itself. This is also why spiritual growth often feels uncomfortable. The soul is not trying to become more impressive, it is trying to become more awake. And awakening usually requires the breaking apart of false identities. Sometimes life removes the version of you that was built entirely around approval. Sometimes it destroys the identity built around control. Sometimes it takes away the attachments you believed you could never survive without. And in those painful moments, the human being feels shattered. But the soul sees something else happening. It sees illusion dissolving. It sees awareness expanding. It sees consciousness slowly returning to itself. This does not mean every painful event was specifically chosen in exact detail before birth. Human beings still create consequences through their choices, fears, attachments, and unconscious behavior. But the Vedas suggest that certain larger lessons, certain energetic movements, and certain opportunities for awakening may already exist within the soul's journey before incarnation begins. And perhaps this explains something many people secretly feel deep down. Sometimes suffering feels older than the event itself. Sometimes heartbreak touches wounds that seem ancient. Sometimes fear appears too deep to belong only to this moment, as if the soul is carrying unfinished echoes from far beyond the current lifetime. The beautiful thing is that the purpose of these experiences was never endless suffering. The purpose was awareness. The purpose was awakening. The purpose was remembering what remains untouched beneath every painful experience. Because eventually, after enough searching, enough heartbreak, enough exhaustion, the soul begins realizing something extraordinary. No external thing can create permanent peace. No relationship can permanently remove fear. No achievement can permanently complete the self. Because what the soul truly seeks is not outside itself at all. It seeks remembrance. It seeks reconnection with the eternal awareness hidden beneath every temporary experience. And maybe that is why your soul accepted certain pain before entering this life. Not because you were meant to be broken forever, but because somewhere beyond fear, beyond ego, and beyond human understanding, your soul believed awakening was more valuable than comfort alone. The silent agreements hidden inside certain human connections. There are certain people who enter your life and immediately feel different from everyone else. You cannot always explain it logically. Sometimes you meet them only once, yet their presence stays inside your mind for years. Sometimes they speak only a few words, yet something inside you feels deeply moved by them. Sometimes you feel connected before trust is even built, and sometimes, without warning, a complete stranger awakens emotions that feel far older than the present moment itself. The Vedas suggest that these connections may not be random at all. According to the ancient teachings, souls do not move through existence separately and meaninglessly. Consciousness carries impressions, energies, and unfinished lessons across lifetimes. Certain souls cross paths repeatedly, not always because they are meant to stay together forever, but because something unfinished still exists between them. Sometimes the purpose is healing, sometimes awakening, sometimes transformation, sometimes closure, and sometimes simply remembrance. This is why some people affect your soul more deeply than others. You may spend years around one person and feel almost nothing deeply transformative. Then suddenly another person appears for a short period of time and changes the direction of your entire emotional world. They awaken hidden fears, hidden desires, hidden wounds, hidden dreams, and hidden parts of yourself you never fully noticed before. The human mind often calls this destiny, but the Vedas view these connections in a more spiritual way. They see them as sacred encounters arranged through the movement of consciousness itself. Not every powerful connection is meant to become permanent love. Not every soul connection arrives to bring peace immediately. Some people arrive to expose what still needs healing inside you. Some arrive to mirror the wounds you have spent years avoiding. Some arrive to break your attachment to illusion, and some arrive only to awaken your soul before continuing their own journey elsewhere. This is one of the most painful truths human beings struggle to accept, because the ego believes that deep connection should always lead to permanent possession. The ego says, if this connection feels powerful, it must belong to me forever. But the soul understands something different. The soul understands that some people are chapters, not destinations. Some are teachers disguised as lovers. Some are mirrors disguised as soulmates. Some are storms disguised as blessings. And some are temporary flames sent only to awaken consciousness before disappearing again into the mystery of life. This is why certain separations hurt so deeply. The pain is not always only about losing the other person. Sometimes the pain comes from losing the identity you became while they were present. Sometimes their arrival awakened parts of you that had been sleeping for years. They made you feel seen, alive, emotional, understood, or spiritually connected in ways you had forgotten were possible. And when they leave, it feels as though a part of your own soul disappeared with them. But often what truly disappeared was not your soul. It was attachment. The Vedas repeatedly warned that attachment creates suffering because human beings try to hold tightly to temporary experiences. They try to freeze moments that were never meant to stay unchanged forever. Everything in life moves. People change. Emotions change. Relationships change. Life itself changes constantly. Yet the ego resists this movement because it fears emptiness. It fears loss. It fears uncertainty. And this fear causes humans to cling desperately to people even when the soul itself is trying to evolve beyond the connection. Sometimes the most painful relationships are not painful because love was absent. They are painful because attachment became stronger than awareness. The soul may have intended the connection to awaken growth, but the ego turned it into emotional dependency. This is why some relationships become spiritually exhausting. Deep down, consciousness knows something is no longer aligned, yet fear continues forcing attachment to survive. One part of the soul wants freedom. Another part fears loneliness more than suffering itself. And so the human being stays trapped between intuition and attachment. The Vedas teach that real love and attachment are not the same thing. Attachment says, "You complete me." Love says, "I honor your existence without needing to control it." Attachment fears endings constantly. Love understands that souls sometimes grow in different directions. Attachment clings desperately. Love allows movement. This is why spiritually awakened people often begin valuing peace more than possession. They stop trying to force every meaningful connection to remain forever. Instead, they begin asking deeper questions. What was this connection trying to teach me? What part of myself did this person awaken? What illusion did this experience expose? Because every deep human connection leaves behind spiritual fingerprints. Some people awaken your self-worth. Some expose your abandonment wounds. Some teach you surrender. Some reveal your fear of loneliness. Some break your ego. Some soften your heart. Some show you the difference between attention and real love. And some people enter your life simply to remind you that your soul is capable of feeling far more deeply than your mind once believed. Perhaps this is why certain connections feel ancient from the very beginning. Sometimes you look into someone's eyes and feel a strange familiarity beyond logic. It is almost as if your soul remembers something your mind cannot fully explain. The conversation may be new, but the energy feels old, comfortable, emotional, mysterious. The Vedas believed that consciousness carries subtle impressions across lifetimes. This does not always mean every powerful connection is romantic destiny. Sometimes it simply means there is unfinished energy between souls still moving toward understanding. And perhaps the most difficult lesson hidden within these sacred connections is this: not everyone who touches your soul is meant to stay forever. Some people are only meant to wake you up. Some arrive during the exact season your soul needs transformation. Some enter your life when you are spiritually asleep and leave only after your awareness begins changing. At first, this feels cruel. The human heart asks, if the connection was so deep, why couldn't it stay? But the soul sees life differently. It understands that permanence is not always the purpose. Transformation is. There are people whose purpose in your life was never to remain physically beside you forever. Their purpose was to redirect your consciousness toward a deeper version of yourself. And often the most life-changing souls are not the ones who stayed the longest. They are the ones who changed something eternal inside you, the ones who made you question yourself, the ones who forced emotional growth, the ones who exposed your illusions, the ones who awakened spiritual longing, the ones who cracked open the heart you had spent years protecting, the ones who unknowingly guided you closer to awareness itself. This is why some people continue living inside your spirit long after they disappear from your physical world. Their impact moved deeper than ordinary memory. They became part of your soul's evolution, and maybe somewhere before this life began, before names and faces existed, before bodies and identities formed, certain souls quietly agreed to meet again, not to own each other forever, not to avoid pain completely, but to awaken something necessary within one another, to help consciousness continue its journey back toward remembrance. Because sometimes the soul does not send people into your life to complete you. Sometimes it sends them to reveal the parts of you that were always waiting to awaken. Why consciousness forgets the contract after birth? If the soul truly existed before this life began, if consciousness entered this world carrying ancient memory, hidden intentions, and unfinished spiritual movement, then one question naturally rises inside the human heart. Why do we remember none of it clearly? Why does life feel so confusing if the soul once understood everything from a higher perspective? Why do human beings arrive here feeling lost, afraid, uncertain, and disconnected from their deeper nature? The Vedas answer this mystery through one of their most powerful ideas, Maya, the great illusion. But Maya does not simply mean the world is fake. That is not what the ancient sages meant. The illusion is much deeper than that. Maya means consciousness becomes hypnotized by temporary reality. The soul enters human life and slowly forgets its eternal nature beneath the weight of identity, emotion, fear, attachment, and physical existence. In the beginning, a child arrives here innocent and open. But slowly the world begins shaping the mind. Family expectations shape identity. Society teaches comparison. Fear teaches self-protection. Pain teaches emotional walls. Desire teaches endless chasing. And little by little, consciousness becomes trapped inside the character it is playing. Eventually, the human being forgets they are awareness itself. They begin believing they are only the body, only the personality, only their success, only their trauma, only their fears, only their thoughts. And this forgetting becomes so complete that most people spend their entire lives trapped inside the surface of existence, without ever questioning who they truly are beneath it all. The Vedas suggest this forgetting is not a mistake. It is part of the human experience itself, because if you remembered everything before birth with complete clarity, life would lose its transformative power. There would be no searching, no uncertainty, no inner discovery, no spiritual awakening through experience. Consciousness enters limitation temporarily so it can rediscover itself from within the illusion. Imagine watching a movie while already knowing every single scene, every emotion, every ending before it even begins. The experience would lose its depth completely. Human life is similar. Forgetting creates the possibility of awakening, and perhaps this is why life often feels like a strange dream. Deep down, many people already sense something is missing. Even while surrounded by people, something feels lonely. Even after success, something still feels incomplete. Even after achieving goals, something quietly continues searching. The world tells human beings that happiness will arrive through external things: more money, more validation, more attention, more beauty, more control, more achievement. Yet after every temporary satisfaction fades away, the emptiness quietly returns. Why? Because the soul remembers something the ego forgot. It remembers that no temporary thing can fully satisfy eternal consciousness. And so the human being keeps searching endlessly outside themselves without realizing the deeper longing was never truly material. It was spiritual. It was the soul searching for remembrance beneath the illusion. This is why certain moments in life suddenly feel strangely powerful. Moments of silence, moments of heartbreak, moments of loss, moments where life unexpectedly slows down. During these moments, the noise of the world weakens for a little while. And when the noise weakens, the soul becomes easier to hear. Sometimes people experience this while staring at the night sky alone. Sometimes during meditation, sometimes after losing someone they deeply loved, sometimes during emotional exhaustion when the old identity finally begins collapsing, and suddenly a strange feeling appears inside them, a feeling that there must be more to life than survival, status, routine, and endless mental noise. This feeling is the beginning of remembrance, the soul quietly pushing against the illusion. The Vedas teach that most human suffering comes from identification. Consciousness becomes so attached to temporary things that it completely forgets its deeper nature. Humans identify with thoughts so strongly that every negative thought feels like absolute truth. They identify with emotions so strongly that every painful feeling feels permanent. They identify with external roles so deeply that losing those roles feels like losing themselves completely. But awareness itself was never truly damaged. The soul remains untouched beneath all temporary experiences. Imagine clouds covering the sky. The clouds move constantly. Storms appear. Darkness comes and goes. Yet above the storm, the sky itself remains unchanged. Human emotions, fears, identities, and experiences are like clouds. Awareness is the sky behind them. But most people become so distracted by the clouds that they forget the sky even exists. This is the illusion of Maya, and modern life strengthens this illusion constantly. People are surrounded by endless distraction every moment of the day. Noise fills the mind continuously. Phones, opinions, pressure, competition, fear, entertainment, comparison, anxiety, emotional overload. Human attention is constantly pulled outward. Very few people spend enough time in stillness to hear the quiet voice beneath the noise. This is why silence feels uncomfortable for many people, because silence removes distraction, and once distraction disappears, hidden emotions begin rising to the surface. Unhealed wounds appear, fear appears, loneliness appears. The human being suddenly comes face to face with themselves. Most run back toward noise immediately, but spiritually awakening people slowly begin moving in the opposite direction. They start craving silence instead of distraction, because somewhere deep inside, the soul recognizes silence as home. The ancient sages understood this deeply. They spent years sitting in forests, mountains, caves, and temples, not because they hated life, but because silence weakens illusion. When the noise of the external world becomes quiet, awareness starts becoming visible again, and slowly the human being begins remembering something extraordinary. They are not merely the voice inside their head. They are not merely the emotional storms passing through them. They are not merely the identity they built to survive this world. They are the awareness silently witnessing all of it. This realization changes everything, because once consciousness begins separating itself from the illusion, suffering starts transforming. Pain still exists, but identity no longer becomes completely trapped inside it. Fear still appears, but awareness no longer fully believes every fearful thought. Loss still hurts, but the soul slowly understands that endings are part of life's movement, not proof of permanent destruction. And perhaps this is why awakening often feels both beautiful and painful at the same time. Beautiful because consciousness begins reconnecting with truth. Painful because illusion must slowly dissolve first. The ego resists this process strongly because the ego survives through identification. It wants certainty, it wants control, it wants permanence in a world where everything changes constantly. But the soul understands that clinging creates suffering, and so life slowly teaches surrender, not weakness, not giving up, but surrendering false identity, surrendering attachment to illusion, surrendering the belief that temporary things can permanently complete the self. The beautiful thing is that even though consciousness forgets after birth, the soul never fully abandons you. It keeps whispering quietly throughout your life, through intuition, through strange emotional recognition, through dreams, through deep longing, through moments where reality suddenly feels bigger than ordinary understanding. And perhaps even now, while listening to these words, there is a part of you feeling something strangely familiar, not because your mind fully understands it yet, but because somewhere beneath the illusion, your soul remembers. The life you resist may be the exact path your soul chose. One of the most painful truths hidden inside human life is that people spend enormous energy fighting the very experiences that may have arrived to transform them. Human beings resist change, resist uncertainty, resist endings, resist discomfort, resist emotional pain, and resist anything that threatens the identity they worked so hard to build. Yet according to the Vedas, much of human suffering does not come only from pain itself. It comes from resistance toward what life is trying to teach through that pain. The soul understands movement. The ego fears movement. The soul understands transformation. The ego wants permanence. The soul understands surrender. The ego wants control. And because of this, human life often becomes an invisible battle between what consciousness is trying to become and what the fearful mind is desperately trying to hold on to. There are moments in life where something deep inside you already knows a chapter has ended, yet another part refuses to let go. You feel it in relationships that no longer bring peace but continue out of attachment. You feel it in identities that no longer reflect who you are becoming. You feel it in environments that slowly drain your spirit, while familiarity keeps you trapped there. Many people stay emotionally attached to suffering simply because suffering has become familiar. This is one of the strangest things about the human mind. People often choose familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. A person may remain in unhealthy relationships because loneliness feels more frightening than emotional exhaustion. Someone may continue pretending to be a version of themselves they secretly outgrew because authenticity risks rejection. Another may keep chasing approval from people who never truly see them because their entire identity became dependent on validation. And slowly, life begins feeling heavy, not because the soul is wrong, but because consciousness is trying to move forward while the ego keeps pulling backward toward old patterns. The Vedas teach that life is constantly moving toward evolution. Nothing in existence remains still forever. Seasons change, bodies change, relationships change, emotions change, entire identities dissolve over time. Yet human beings continuously try to freeze life, into permanent forms. They want permanent certainty in a temporary world, and this creates suffering because life eventually removes what consciousness can no longer grow inside. This is why some endings arrive unexpectedly. A relationship suddenly collapses, a dream falls apart, a job disappears, a person walks away, an identity breaks down completely, and in those moments, the human being often feels abandoned by existence itself. They ask, why is this happening to me? Why is life taking away what I loved? Why does everything I depend on keep changing? But sometimes the soul sees something the mind cannot yet understand. Sometimes what feels like destruction is actually redirection. Sometimes what feels like rejection is protection. Sometimes what feels like punishment is awakening. The painful truth is that many people only realize this years later. Time passes, awareness deepens, and suddenly they look back at the very moment that once shattered them and quietly whisper, "That experience changed my life in ways I could never see at the time." The relationship that broke your heart may have prevented a lifetime of deeper suffering. The loneliness you hated may have forced you to finally discover yourself. The uncertainty you feared may have pushed you toward your true path. The collapse you resisted may have destroyed an identity that was never truly aligned with your soul. The Vedas repeatedly remind us that the human perspective is extremely limited. The ego sees only the present emotional pain. The soul sees the entire movement of consciousness across time. Imagine standing inside a storm while only seeing darkness around you. From your position, the storm feels endless, but someone watching from high above can already see the clear sky waiting beyond it. The soul sees life from a wider perspective than the fearful mind. And perhaps this is why surrender becomes such an important spiritual teaching. Not surrender as weakness, not giving up on life, but surrendering resistance toward reality itself. Most people misunderstand surrender because they think it means becoming passive. But the Vedas speak about a deeper form of surrender. A surrender where the human being stops fighting every change, every ending, every uncertainty, and begins trusting that consciousness itself may be guiding life toward growth, even through painful experiences. This does not mean every painful situation should be accepted blindly. The soul does not ask people to remain inside abuse, suffering, or self-destruction. Real surrender is not emotional slavery. Real surrender means releasing attachment to illusion and listening more carefully to what awareness itself is trying to reveal. Sometimes the soul whispers, "This chapter is over," but fear answers, "No, hold tighter." Sometimes intuition says, "You are no longer meant to live this way," but attachment replies, "At least this pain feels familiar." And so human beings stay trapped between truth and fear. The Vedas teach that awakening begins the moment you stop asking life to obey your expectations and start asking what existence itself may be trying to teach through your experiences. This changes everything, because instead of seeing every obstacle as meaningless punishment, you begin looking deeper. What is this experience trying to reveal? What attachment is being exposed? What identity is collapsing? What part of me is trying to awaken? Suddenly suffering becomes more than suffering. It becomes revelation. There is also another painful truth hidden inside this journey. The soul often grows through experiences the ego would never choose consciously. No human being asks for heartbreak. No one asks for grief. No one asks for uncertainty. Yet these experiences often become the very moments that awaken depth, compassion, wisdom, and spiritual awareness. People who have suffered deeply often become softer toward others, more understanding, more emotionally awake, more capable of seeing beyond appearances. Because pain removes illusions, it humbles the ego. It forces human beings to realize how fragile temporary life truly is. And slowly something inside begins changing. The endless chasing weakens. The need for constant validation weakens. The obsession with control weakens, and awareness becomes stronger. This is why many spiritually awakening people eventually stop asking, "How do I make life perfect?" Instead, they begin asking, how do I live in alignment with truth? Because perfection was never the soul's true goal. Awareness was. The Vedas suggest that before entering this life, the soul may have understood something the human personality forgot after birth. It understood that real growth often requires the breaking apart of false identities. It understood that attachment creates suffering. It understood that awakening cannot happen while consciousness remains completely asleep inside comfort and illusion. And perhaps somewhere beyond memory, beyond fear, and beyond human understanding, your soul accepted this difficult journey not because it wanted to suffer forever, but because it knew something extraordinary waits on the other side of awakening. Freedom, not freedom from all pain, but freedom from complete identification with pain, freedom from illusion, freedom from the endless fear of losing temporary things, freedom from believing the temporary character is your entire existence. This is why the path your soul chose may not always look beautiful from the perspective of the human mind. Some chapters will feel confusing, some will feel unfair, some will feel unbearably heavy while you are walking through them, but later, when awareness deepens, you may suddenly realize something shocking. The very life you spent resisting was slowly becoming the path that awakened you. The strange signs your soul is slowly remembering everything. There comes a quiet moment in many people's lives when the world suddenly stops feeling the same. Nothing dramatic may happen on the outside. The same streets still exist. The same people still surround you. The same routines continue repeating every day. Yet something deep within begins changing silently. The things that once excited you no longer satisfy you completely. The distractions that once kept your mind busy start feeling empty. The noise of the world becomes exhausting instead of entertaining. And somewhere beneath all of this, the soul begins whispering again. This is often the beginning of remembrance, not loud enlightenment, not magical visions, not becoming perfect overnight, but a slow awakening hidden beneath ordinary life. The Vedas suggest that the soul never fully forgets its eternal nature. Even after birth, even after years of emotional conditioning and worldly distraction, something ancient continues living quietly beneath the surface of human identity. And eventually, through suffering, silence, exhaustion, heartbreak, or deep reflection, that hidden awareness slowly begins rising again. At first, the signs are subtle. You begin questioning things you once accepted blindly. You start noticing how deeply people are trapped inside fear, comparison, competition, and emotional noise. You begin seeing how much of modern life is built around distraction, endless chasing, endless proving, endless performing for validation, and suddenly something inside you feels tired of pretending. This can feel confusing in the beginning because the awakening does not always arrive as happiness immediately. Sometimes it first arrives as discomfort. You realize you can no longer fully enjoy the same superficial conversations. Certain environments begin feeling emotionally heavy. Crowds become draining. Noise becomes overwhelming. The constant pressure to impress others begins feeling meaningless, and slowly, silence starts becoming more attractive than attention. This is one of the first strange signs of spiritual remembrance. The soul begins craving peace more than stimulation. Many people ignore this feeling at first. They think something is wrong with them. They wonder why they suddenly feel disconnected from the lifestyle, relationships, or goals that once seemed important. But according to the Vedas, this often happens because awareness itself is changing. Consciousness begins outgrowing certain illusions. You start noticing energy differently. Some people leave you feeling calm and expanded. Others leave you emotionally exhausted without obvious reason. Certain places feel peaceful the moment you enter them. Other places feel heavy even when everything appears normal on the surface. The soul becomes more sensitive because it is slowly waking up from unconsciousness, and this sensitivity can feel lonely. One of the deepest parts of awakening is realizing you no longer fit comfortably into environments built entirely around distraction and ego. You begin craving deeper truth. While much of the world continues chasing temporary things, you start longing for genuine connection, while others remain trapped inside performance and appearance. This creates a strange emotional distance between you and the world around you. At first, it can feel painful. You may feel misunderstood, disconnected, emotionally isolated, as if you are changing internally while nobody else notices. But the Vedas viewed solitude very differently from modern society. They did not see silence as emptiness, they saw it as purification. They understood that awareness becomes visible only when distraction weakens. Most people spend their entire lives running away from themselves. The moment silence appears, they immediately reach for distraction because they are uncomfortable sitting alone with their own thoughts, fears, and emotions. But spiritually awakening people slowly begin moving in the opposite direction. They begin seeking stillness, not because they hate life, but because something inside them remembers that peace exists beneath noise. This is why many awakening souls suddenly become drawn toward nature, meditation, quiet nights, deep reflection, spiritual teachings, or moments of complete stillness. The soul recognizes silence almost like returning home after being lost for a very long time. Another strange sign of remembrance is emotional exhaustion with false identity. You become tired of pretending to be someone you are not just to gain approval. You begin questioning the masks you wear around others. You realize how much of your behavior was shaped by fear of rejection, fear of judgment, or the desperate need to belong. And eventually something inside says, I cannot keep abandoning myself just to be accepted. This moment is powerful because it marks the beginning of inner honesty. The soul no longer wants performance. It wants truth. You may also notice that your intuition becomes stronger during this period. Certain situations no longer feel right even when they appear good externally. You begin sensing when someone's energy is dishonest. You start feeling emotional warnings before painful situations fully unfold. Deep inside, awareness starts guiding you more quietly than logic ever could. The Vedas believed intuition is not irrational weakness. It is consciousness communicating beyond ordinary thought. The soul often knows things before the mind understands them. This is why awakening people sometimes walk away from things they cannot fully explain logically. Their awareness senses misalignment long before the external evidence becomes visible. Another powerful sign of remembrance is the collapse of old desires. Things you once desperately chased suddenly lose their emotional power over you. Approval no longer feels as important. Attention feels temporary. Material success alone no longer satisfies the deeper hunger inside your spirit. Even after achieving certain goals, you realize something is still searching quietly within you. At first, this realization can feel disappointing because the world teaches people that happiness exists somewhere outside themselves. Society constantly says, if you achieve enough, earn enough, attract enough, or become enough, then peace will finally arrive. But the soul slowly realizes peace was never hiding inside external things permanently. This realization changes everything. You stop asking, how do I become more impressive? And begin asking, how do I become more real? You stop asking, how do I gain more attention? And begin asking, what actually nourishes my soul? This shift is sacred because for the first time, awareness begins turning inward instead of endlessly chasing outward. And perhaps one of the most beautiful signs of remembrance is that your relationship with pain begins changing. You stop seeing suffering only as punishment. Instead, you begin asking deeper questions. What is this experience teaching me? What illusion is breaking apart? What attachment is being exposed? What part of me is trying to awaken? This does not mean pain suddenly becomes easy. Human emotions still hurt deeply. Loss still hurts. Heartbreak still hurts. Loneliness still hurts. But awareness slowly stops identifying completely with the suffering. Instead of drowning inside emotional storms, you begin witnessing them, and this changes the entire spiritual journey. because the Vedas teach that awakening begins the moment consciousness realizes it is not merely the storm, it is the awareness watching the storm. This realization arrives slowly, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through exhaustion, sometimes through silence, sometimes after life completely destroys the identity you once depended on, and eventually the soul begins remembering something extraordinary. You were never truly separated from peace. You only became distracted from it. The noise of the world covered it temporarily. Fear covered it temporarily. Attachment covered it temporarily. But beneath every thought, every fear, every emotional wound, every identity, and every temporary experience, awareness itself remained quietly present the entire time. And maybe that is what awakening truly is. Not becoming something new, but remembering what your soul already knew long before this human life ever began. The moment awareness begins breaking the ancient cycle, there comes a moment in the spiritual journey when something inside you becomes tired of repeating the same suffering over and over again, the same emotional wounds, the same fears, the same attachments, the same painful patterns appearing through different people, different places, and different chapters of life. At first, most human beings think life is simply being cruel to them, but eventually, awareness begins noticing something deeper. The pattern keeps repeating because consciousness has not fully awakened from it yet. This realization changes everything. The Vedas teach that most human beings live unconsciously without realizing it. They believe they are making completely free choices, yet much of their behavior is actually driven by old wounds, fear, conditioning, attachment, ego, and emotional memory. People repeat the same cycles because they are reacting automatically rather than living with awareness. Someone abandoned in childhood may spend years chasing people who cannot truly love them. Someone deeply afraid of rejection may abandon their authentic self just to gain acceptance. Someone emotionally wounded may continue creating relationships built on attachment instead of peace. And often these patterns continue for years because the human being never pauses long enough to observe them clearly. This is why awareness becomes so spiritually powerful. The moment you truly see a pattern consciously, the cycle begins weakening. The Vedas repeatedly emphasized observation because unconscious suffering survives through blindness. Patterns control people most strongly when they remain unseen. Fear controls people because they believe every fearful thought automatically. Attachment controls people because they never question why they cling so desperately. Emotional pain controls people because they completely identify with the suffering instead of witnessing it. But awareness changes the entire experience. The moment you stop blindly reacting and begin observing, something sacred begins happening inside consciousness. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm. As long as you believe you are the storm itself, every emotion feels overwhelming and permanent. Every fear feels absolute. Every painful thought feels like truth. But the moment you step back internally and simply observe the storm, something changes. You realize, the storm is happening inside me, but it is not my deepest identity. This is one of the most life-changing realizations hidden inside the Vedas. You are not every thought appearing in your mind. You are not every emotion passing through your body. You are not every fear created by memory. You are the awareness, silently witnessing all of it. At first, this sounds simple, but truly understanding it changes human suffering completely. Most people spend their entire lives trapped inside mental noise because they believe every thought deserves obedience. The mind says, you are not enough. You will be abandoned. You must control everything. You must keep chasing approval. You will never heal. And immediately the human being suffers because they identify with the voice completely. But awareness slowly begins questioning the voice. Who is hearing these thoughts? This question is ancient. The sages spent lifetimes meditating upon it because once consciousness turns inward and notices the observer itself, a profound shift begins happening. You start realizing there has always been something inside you untouched by every temporary experience. The child suffered, the teenager suffered, the adult suffered, Different identities came and went. Different emotional storms appeared and disappeared. Yet something remained present quietly through all of it. The witness, the awareness, the silent observer. This awareness was never fully broken. Even when your human self felt shattered, and healing truly begins the moment consciousness reconnects with this deeper part of itself. The Vedas teach that suffering becomes endless when awareness is completely trapped inside identification. Human beings identify with pain so strongly that the pain becomes their entire identity. They stop saying, "I am experiencing sadness," and begin saying, "I am broken." They stop saying, "I feel fear," and begin saying, "I am fear." This is how illusion strengthens itself. The soul forgets its eternal nature and becomes trapped inside temporary emotional movement. But awareness breaks this hypnosis slowly, not overnight, not instantly, but moment by moment. The first time you observe anger without blindly exploding into it. The first time you notice attachment without automatically obeying it. The first time you sit with loneliness without running toward distraction. The first time you witness fear without believing every word it says. These moments are spiritually enormous because awareness is beginning to separate itself from unconsciousness. This is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from all human emotion, but freedom from complete enslavement to emotion. The Vedas never taught people to suppress their feelings or become emotionally numb. True awareness is not cold detachment. It is conscious presence. You still feel sadness. You still feel grief. You still feel heartbreak. But now there is space around the emotion. The soul no longer drowns completely inside every temporary storm. And this changes the way suffering moves through your life. Pain still visits you, but it no longer defines your entire existence. Fear still appears, but awareness sees it more clearly. Thoughts still come and go, but you stop treating every thought as truth. This is why spiritually awakening people often become calmer over time. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because their relationship with life changes. They stop fighting every emotional wave. They stop chasing control constantly. They stop trying to build permanent security inside a temporary world. And slowly, peace begins emerging from within, rather than depending entirely on external circumstances. Another ancient cycle awareness begins breaking is the cycle of attachment. Human beings cling desperately to people, identities, achievements, and expectations because they secretly believe these things will complete them permanently. But eventually life shows that everything external changes. Relationships change, bodies age, circumstances shift, possessions disappear, approval fades. The ego suffers deeply because it wants permanence from temporary things. But awareness slowly begins understanding that peace cannot be built entirely on what constantly changes. This realization creates emotional freedom. You begin loving without desperate possession. You begin living without constant fear of loss. You begin appreciating life without trying to control every outcome. This does not make you emotionally empty. It makes you spiritually grounded. The Vedas teach that attachment weakens the moment awareness recognizes the temporary nature of all physical experience. Everything here is moving. Everything here changes. And once consciousness fully accepts this truth, a strange softness begins appearing inside the soul. You stop resisting life so violently. You stop clinging so tightly. You stop fighting every ending as if it were the end of your existence. And perhaps the deepest cycle awareness breaks is the illusion that you are separate from the peace you seek. Most people spend years searching outside themselves for what already exists quietly within awareness itself. They search through relationships, achievement, attention, control, status, and endless external movement, hoping something will finally complete them. But the soul eventually realizes something extraordinary. Peace was never absent. Awareness was simply distracted from it. The silence beneath thought was always there. The stillness beneath fear was always there. The eternal awareness beneath every temporary identity was always there. The Vedas describe awakening not as becoming something new, but as removing illusion. Like clouds slowly moving away from the sky was never destroyed. It was only hidden temporarily. And maybe this is why healing often feels less like building a new self and more like remembering what existed before fear took over. The moment awareness begins breaking the ancient cycle, life itself starts feeling different. You move more slowly, you react less blindly, you listen more deeply, you value peace more than performance. You stop chasing every desire created by the ego, and for the first time, consciousness begins living from presence rather than survival. This is the sacred shift the soul has been moving toward all along. Not perfection, not becoming emotionally untouchable, but awakening from unconsciousness, returning to awareness, and remembering that beneath every temporary storm of human life, there has always been something eternal within you, quietly watching, waiting, and guiding you back toward yourself, returning to the eternal silence your soul came from. Eventually, after years of chasing, struggling, searching, fearing, proving, losing, and becoming emotionally exhausted by the endless noise of human life, something very quiet begins happening inside the soul. It does not happen loudly, it does not arrive with dramatic music or sudden perfection. It happens softly, almost invisibly, deep beneath the surface of the personality. The soul begins wanting to return home, not home as a physical place, not a city, not a relationship, not even a specific moment from the past, but a deeper kind of home, a silence the soul remembers without fully understanding why. The Vedas teach that before consciousness entered this world, before identity formed, before fear existed, before the human mind became crowded with memory and attachment, there was only awareness resting inside stillness, a state beyond struggle, beyond comparison, beyond endless mental noise. The soul came from silence, and somewhere deep within itself, it has been longing to return ever since. This is why no external thing ever fully satisfies the human heart forever. At first, people believe peace is hiding somewhere outside themselves. They spend years chasing love, success, beauty, achievement, attention, money, approval, and control, believing one final accomplishment will finally make the emptiness disappear. But after every temporary victory fades, something inside quietly continues searching. The soul is searching for something deeper than pleasure. It is searching for remembrance. The strange thing about human life is that people spend years trying to become more, while the soul quietly longs to become less. Less noise, less ego, less fear, less performance, less attachment, less endless mental movement. Because beneath all the chaos, the soul already knows something the mind forgot. Peace is not created, it is uncovered. The Vedas describe awareness almost like the sky hidden behind clouds. Thoughts are clouds, fear is clouds, desire is clouds, emotional pain is clouds, identity is clouds. The human being spends so much time staring at the storm that they completely forget the open sky behind it has been there the entire time. And eventually, life itself begins exhausting the ego. This exhaustion is sacred. At first, people resist it. They think they are becoming weak because the things that once excited them no longer feel meaningful in the same way. The endless chasing becomes tiring. The constant pressure to prove themselves becomes emotionally heavy. Loud environments become draining. Superficial conversations begin feeling empty. But this is often not depression. It is awakening. The soul begins pulling away from illusion. The Vedas understood that every human being eventually reaches a point where external life can no longer fully distract them from themselves. And during this stage, consciousness begins turning inward, not because the world is evil, but because the soul is trying to remember what exists beneath the world. This is why many spiritually awakening people suddenly crave solitude. They begin enjoying silence more deeply than attention. They start sitting alone at night simply thinking about existence itself. They become emotional while watching sunsets, listening to rain, staring at the stars, or sitting quietly without distraction. The soul remembers stillness, and in stillness, something extraordinary begins happening. The mind slows down enough for awareness to finally hear itself again. For most of human life, people are trapped inside endless thought. The mind constantly speaks, worrying, comparing, regretting, planning, fearing, judging, chasing, remembering, imagining. The noise never fully stops. And because of this endless mental movement, most people never notice the silence underneath it. But the silence has always been there. Even now, beneath every thought, beneath every emotion, beneath every fear, there is a still awareness quietly watching. The Vedas teach that this awareness is your deepest nature, not the personality, not the ego, not the emotional story, but the silent witness beneath all temporary experience. And perhaps this is why moments of true stillness feel strangely emotional. Sometimes people sit quietly and suddenly begin crying without fully understanding why. Sometimes they feel overwhelming peace for no obvious reason. Sometimes they experience a deep sense of familiarity while meditating or simply resting in silence. The soul recognizes itself. For a brief moment, the illusion weakens, the endless performance stops, and consciousness touches something eternal within itself again. This is what the sages spent their lives trying to explain. Not a religion, not a philosophy, but a direct experience. The realization that beneath every temporary identity exists an awareness untouched by the chaos of the world. And this awareness has been with you since the very beginning. It watched your childhood. It watched your heartbreak. It watched every version of you rise and disappear. It remained present during every emotional storm. Even when your human self felt broken, awareness itself remained silently whole beneath the suffering. The beautiful thing is that the soul never truly forgot the way back home. Even while trapped inside illusion, it continued whispering quietly throughout your life, through intuition, through longing, through emotional exhaustion with superficial living, through your attraction towards silence, through your discomfort around false people and false environments, through your desire for something real. The soul has been guiding you inward the entire time. And perhaps the deepest realization hidden within the Vedas is this: you were never truly separated from peace. You only became distracted from it. The world taught you to search outside yourself endlessly, but awareness itself was always waiting quietly beneath the noise. This changes the way you see life completely. You stop chasing permanent happiness through temporary things. You stop expecting people to complete you. You stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world. You stop trying to control every outcome. And slowly, a softer way of living begins emerging. You become more present, more conscious, more gentle with yourself, more accepting of life's movement. You begin understanding that endings are not failures. They are part of existence. Seasons change, bodies age, relationships evolve, identities dissolve, but awareness itself continues. This realization removes a deep layer of fear from the soul, because eventually you understand that the deepest part of you was never the temporary character at all. You were the awareness watching the character. This is why the Vedas speak about death differently from ordinary fear-based thinking. They do not describe consciousness as something completely destroyed by the ending of the body. They describe the soul as movement, transition, return, like a wave returning to the ocean, not disappearing, returning. And maybe this is why so many people secretly fear silence while also deeply longing for it at the same time. Because silence dissolves illusion, it removes distraction, it forces the ego to become still, and beneath that stillness, the soul quietly remembers where it came from. Perhaps this is also why your entire life has felt like a strange search for something you could never fully explain. The longing was never truly for money, approval, or control alone. Those were only temporary substitutes for something much deeper. The soul was searching for itself, searching for the peace hidden beneath all temporary identity, searching for the eternal silence it once knew before entering this human experience. And maybe tonight, after everything life has shown you, after every heartbreak, every fear, every attachment, every painful lesson, and every chapter that shaped your soul, you are finally beginning to understand something extraordinary. The journey was never about becoming someone greater than others. It was about remembering what you already were beneath the illusion. Ancient awareness, eternal consciousness, a soul temporarily walking through human life. And one day, after every role disappears, after every fear dissolves, after every temporary identity fades back into silence, the soul will return once again to the stillness it came from. Not lost, not broken, but awakened. And perhaps that is the real reason you found this message tonight. Not by accident, not because random words appeared on a screen, but because somewhere deep inside you, something ancient was already ready to remember. Maybe your soul has been trying to whisper to you for years through every strange feeling you could never explain, through every painful ending, through every moment where the world suddenly felt empty even when everything looked fine on the outside, through every night you stared into silence feeling like there had to be something more than this endless cycle of fear, pressure, attachment, and emotional noise. And maybe now you finally understand. You were never broken. You were never abandoned by existence. You were never randomly thrown into this life without meaning. Your soul came here carrying something ancient, a silent contract, a journey toward awakening hidden beneath ordinary human life. Every heartbreak changed you. Every loss shaped you. Every difficult chapter cracked open another layer of illusion. Even the pain that almost destroyed you carried hidden wisdom inside it. And through all of it, something eternal remained quietly alive within you. The awareness watching your entire story unfold, the silent witness beneath every identity, the part of you untouched by fear, untouched by time, untouched by the endless movement of the world. So tonight, stop fighting yourself for a moment. Stop carrying the weight of becoming everything perfectly. Stop believing you must solve your entire life immediately. Just breathe slowly, let your mind soften, let the noise drift farther away, and remember this one truth quietly before sleep finds you tonight. You are not merely a human being trying to survive this world. You are ancient awareness temporarily walking through a human experience. And maybe, after all the searching, after all the suffering, after all the lifetimes of forgetting, your soul is finally beginning to remember the silence it came from. If this message reached something deep inside you, let me know in the comments with the words, "I remember." And if you want more journeys into the hidden wisdom of the Vedas, ancient consciousness, and the silent truths hidden beneath human life, subscribe to the channel and continue walking this path with us. Until next time, rest gently in awareness and let your soul return quietly to silence.